Our program for the afternoon begins in 5 minutes.
¡Vamos!
All right, to ease us back into future-ready Iowa urgency mode, I'm going to share with you a video that's been shared with us, a very exciting window into the world of a work-based learning innovation taking place within the Waterloo Community School District. And that's all I'm going to say to tee it up, so enjoy.
Waterloo School stands out as a leader for when they're helping their high school students plan for college and career training. That includes rapidly expanding the Waterloo Career Center and offering work-based learning experiences that include things like registered apprenticeships. But now you're thinking that kindergarten is the place where the career development should start. What is driving this vision, and how do you think that you'll make it become a reality?
In 2016, we started the Waterloo Career Center, and it launched with just 37 students that fall, with just a couple of career pathways. And now we have grown to 18 pathways, and we have, shy of 2,000 students coming to this center from 7 different public schools and 3 different private schools. And so it has really become a strong foundation in the way that we prepare kids. And we realized that we needed to back all the way up to the very beginning when students enter into the Waterloo Schools buildings. We're going to start talking about careers, and we're going to try to help students see the match between what they're learning in their classrooms and how it could turn into an actual career when they leave us. So we've been focusing a lot on K-12 articulated vision for career development.
How will you prepare your teachers to do this, particularly to integrate new career development standards into the curriculum?
We started last year really solidifying the vision for K-12 career development. So that 3-year plan really is, this year is career awareness and getting things started. So we have 4 standards that we're working on with students. So we believe that we have to have a lot of exposure to a lot of careers. That's standard 1. The second standard is really looking at self-awareness and making sure that we're starting at kindergarten all the way through 12th grade and helping kids get to know their interests and their aptitudes and their attitudes so that they can really hone in on what might make sense for them after they graduate. The third standard is really good, solid career planning to make sure that everything they do while they're in our walls within our district, it helps them kind of figure out what they want to do. And then standard 4 is really work-based learning experience. The model that we've used is we have this funnel where we have kindergartners who come to us, and so we really want to have conversations with them from a very early age. We want to do some, maybe some interest inventories when they're in, 2nd or 3rd grade, and then repeat that again when they're in 5th grade and 8th grade and all the way through. And at the end, when they graduate, they have to narrow down their choices while they're with us. We believe the days of having an undecided 12th grader should be over. The second year, we'll really take it to greater levels, and then by that 3rd year, we really believe that it should be pretty embedded in what our students are doing.
What do you need from employers to make this a success?
We believe that our businesses can help us give authentic work experiences to students. We think our businesses are going to be invaluable in helping us give opportunities to all of our students.
It's important for all organizations, whether small or large, to gain different perspectives. It's rewarding for that student, but it's also rewarding for the organization because you gain a different insight, a different perspective, and ultimately it creates a new outcome that you wouldn't have otherwise had.
One thing I would say is when we launched the Waterloo Career Center, it became evident very quickly how much our businesses wanted to support our work and how much they want to partner with us. They believe that the work that we're doing actually is mutually beneficial. It helps our students see relevance in authentic experiences, but it also helps them fill the jobs that they have open right now. There is a true worker shortage, and we believe that we're part of that puzzle. Right now we have approximately 30 official sponsors of our Waterloo Career Center, and we believe that'll just explode as we move forward with this.
Lastly, why has it become urgent to better connect with what students learn in school to real-world applications long before they even graduate?
Our purpose for K-12 career development really has to do with what's good for our students, but also what's good for our communities. Having students think about careers and their life after high school is motivating to kids. It gives purpose, it gives mission, it gives a foundation for, why they're learning what they're learning. This whole mission is just so good for our students, and it's good for our economy, it's good for our businesses. We just think it's the right work. We believe in Future Ready Iowa, we always have. We cannot wait to prepare our kids for life.
How do you like it? The end of the undecided 12th grader. What a great tagline. I appreciate Jane Lindeman, Superintendent of the Waterloo Community Schools, and her team for sharing that visionary video. In fact, Superintendent Lindeman, are you here to be recognized? Thank you for joining us. Let's hear it for Jane Lindeman and the Waterloo Schools. Nice pioneering, nice innovation. Speaking of innovation, our guest was the result of a brainstorm by which we really wanted to bring to you a thinker aligned with the spirit of this summit, transforming education for the workplace. And so we wanted someone whose own education was transformative and who is also engaged in transforming education for those she works with, and we found her. And credit to Collins Aerospace. Thank you so much for enabling us to bring Emily to Iowa. She is an engineer by undergraduate training at the University of West Virginia and engineering and technology policy master's degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She worked for NASA for a while before turning her complete devotion and energy to science and STEM communications, passionate especially about opportunities for young women in STEM. And she's a successful writer, a devoted mentor, and a celebrated television host. You may know, I've come to know also that there's a hit series on Netflix called Emily's Wonder Lab. Emily is the co-producer and the host of this Netflix show. I strongly recommend to you, especially if you have STEM inspirable kids. With that, help me give a warm Iowa welcome to Emily Calandrelli.
Thank you, everyone. I am so excited to be with you all here today. I met a lot of you last night, and you all were just so welcoming and nice. And I mean, who knew? Somebody should tell people that people from the Midwest are very, very nice and welcoming. It's a hidden secret. So my name is Emily Calandrelli. You may know me on the internet as the Space Gal. If you have young children, you may know me as the host of Emily's Wonder Lab. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career, how I got excited about science and space exploration, a little bit about women in STEM, or the lack thereof, the problems that causes down the line, some ways that maybe we can help alleviate this issue. I'm going to talk a little bit about my philosophy for science communication, which is empathetic science communication. So just to give you a little overview of my career, I studied science and engineering for 8 years. My latest degrees were from MIT in aeronautics and astronautics and something called technology and policy. And today, I am a science communicator, which is a new term that means that I talk about science and space exploration on TV shows, through books, public speaking, social media, basically any medium that I can get my hands on. But with everything I do, my goal is to make science more welcoming for everyone, which is a shared interest that I have with a lot of people in this room. I met a lot of you yesterday. I think we are all kindred spirits here. And so just to give you a rundown of the things that I've done lately, it all started with a show called Exploration Outer Space, which airs on Fox. That showcases the coolest things that goes on in the space industry today. It's more of an adult show for high school students and above. I'm an author of the children's chapter book series for ages 6 to 10 called The Ada Lace Adventures. It's a book that I kind of wished that I had when I was a kid about science and adventure, but featuring a little girl as the main character. I'm a chief correspondent for Bill Nye on Bill Nye Saves the World. And if anybody would like to know what it's like to work with Bill Nye, please let me know, because I would love to tell you. Bill Nye is the best. And then I have my own Netflix show called Emily's Wonder Lab, which I'll tell you more about in a second. And my latest book that I wrote after my daughter was born, for those of you who watched Emily's Wonder Lab, that was the bump in the show. She is now 2 years old. I wrote Reach for the Stars, and that one comes out in March of next year. My third book in the Ada Lace Adventures was launched to space through the Storytime from Space program. This is a very cool program where they pick some of the best STEM books to launch on a rocket to the International Space Station, where they're read aloud by astronauts. So any educators in the audience, if you're looking for a free, really cool read aloud program, this is the one. Storytimefromspace.com is where you can find lots of books read aloud by astronauts. And then recently, I created my own clothing line. It's a science and space-themed clothing line with women and girls in mind. You'll notice that this is a theme of things that I do. I created this because for me, and when I was shopping for my daughter, I had a hard time finding science and space-themed clothing that were meant for women and girls, right? And so I created my own. Now, if you were to tell me that I would be working with Bill Nye and people like Will Smith and Cardi B and having my own TV show on Netflix where I try to get other kids to be inspired by their love of science, I would have called you crazy. This is not the career that I expected for myself, because I'm the first person in my family to pursue a degree in STEM. I didn't know anybody who was in science or engineering. What I did know was my dad grew up in poverty in West Virginia, and he worked his way up to middle class to bring my family to middle class. And so when I was deciding what I wanted to be when I grew up, I had that legacy in the back of my mind. And so I was a very practical, financially driven young student. And when I was a high school senior, I Googled all of the majors one could major in college, and I looked at their starting salaries. And across the board, engineers made the most money. So that is how I decided to go into engineering. But I didn't know what type of engineering, because as you know, there are many different types. And I remember walking down the hallways of West Virginia University and seeing a poster on the wall that looked a bit like this. And it said something like, "Do your homework weightless." And I wasn't into science or engineering. I didn't know what that meant. I was like, is this some weird nerd metaphor that I don't understand? Is this from Star Trek? And no, it turns out that it was a class that you could take if you studied aerospace engineering, where you could get together with your friends and design a science experiment to fly on something called the Vomit Comet. Now, if you haven't heard of the Vomit Comet yet, let me blow your mind, because it is the coolest thing that you will ever learn about. It is the reason that I chose to go into aerospace engineering, and that kickstarted my career to becoming the space gal. The Vomit Comet is a plane that flies in the air like an 8,000-foot roller coaster in the sky. And it does this so that the people and the science experiments inside float weightless, like astronauts. And so when you go over the hump, you feel weightless. When you go under, you feel really heavy, about twice your weight. So you feel weightless and heavy and weightless and heavy and weightless and heavy and weightless and heavy and weightless and heavy for an hour and a half, which is why they call it the Vomit Comet. And so I got to ride on the Vomit Comet, and it was the coolest thing I've ever done. And so when I got my own TV show, when that sort of thing happens, they often ask, what do you want to do in your own TV show? And I told them I wanted to ride the Vomit Comet again. So I'm going to show you a clip of that experience. You'll see I'm flying with a guy named Sam, who is a professional dancer. We wanted to do our own experiment in weightlessness, and we decided to test out some professional dance moves. I am no professional dancer, so please do not judge.
Before we land, I have a few things left on my zero-G bucket list. A spacewalk, some acrobatics,
Eating like an astronaut.
snacking, and even juggling.
You can actually do it on the moon.
Another dance move we need to try is the pirouette. On land, Sam's pirouette was smooth and effortless. Let's see how he does up here. Effortless, but not so smooth. Now it's my turn. Obviously not a professional dancer.
Wow!
Down, coming out!
Maybe if we hold hands, we can have more control. Not quite.
That didn't work! Wow!
Feet down, coming out. Release!
Here's another experiment, jumping through a hula hoop. Now that I've seen Sam's attempt, it's my turn.
She's a pro! She's a pro!
Will! No.
Let's face it, if you're going to have a once-in-a-lifetime experience, you might as well have some fun.
So that's the coolest thing I've ever done. And that's the reason I went into aerospace engineering. But I was a bit of an outlier, right? Because while women make up 57% of the US workforce, we only make up 29% of STEM jobs. And when you get to the upper management levels of the companies in these STEM fields, that gender disparity is much worse. And to highlight the gender disparity at the highest levels in aerospace, we can look at the demographic of people who have been to space. And out of the 570 some, this data is a little bit old, so those numbers are a little bit higher now, 570 some people who have ever gone to space, only about 12% of them have been women. So that number is trending in the right direction, but 12% out of 100 for a gender that makes up more than 50% of the world population is still not a very good number. And the reason why this is important is because going to space is a very unique experience. The people who have gone to space talk about experiencing something known as the overview effect. Now, the overview effect is this cognitive shift in perspective of the way you view our planet and the species on that planet. From this unique vantage point, you see that we're all living together on this fragile ball hanging in the void of space. You see a planet without the borders that humans have created. You see our planet with the paper-thin atmosphere. The astronauts who have gone to space, they come back to Earth and they talk about how they want to be a better neighbor to each other. They want to be a better steward of the environment. They come back, they tell stories, they write books, they give talks, but all of these stories so far have been told from a very limited perspective. Mostly male, mostly white, mostly American, and mostly scientists and engineers. And so I want you to think for a second, how might the world change if these stories were told from a more diverse perspective? What poems and art might be created? What policy plans might be put in place? What education plans might be put in place if we had more diverse people going to space? What Beyonce song, what Justin Bieber song might be created? And I say that part, only half kidding, because if Beyonce wrote a song about how her view has changed on our atmosphere, on climate change, on how she is now an advocate for environmentalism, I think that would move the needle a little bit. Now, NASA in particular is doing a much better job of selecting female astronauts, but this wasn't always the case. And when they sent their first female into space, Sally Ride, back in 1983, the engineers on the ground weren't very diverse either. They were all men. And in 1983, when we were sending Sally Ride into space, there was some question as to what to put in her personal kit. And so the engineers, all men, on the ground asked her, would 100 tampons be the right number of tampons for a 7-day mission in space? Now, for those of you in the audience who haven't had, let's say, the joy of having a period, that number is too high. It's too high. So she responded and said, no, that would not be the right number. And they said, well, we know that's more than you need, but failure is not an option. And she said, you could easily cut that number in half and you'd be wildly, obscenely safe. And because I love TikTok so much, I thought I'd give you the musical rendition of this same story by comedian and musician Marcia Belsky.
Remember when NASA sent a woman to space for only 6 days and they gave her 100 tampons, 100 tampons. And they asked, will that be enough? Cause they didn't know if that was enough. These are our nation's greatest minds. They are literally rocket scientists. They also tied the tampons together by the strings like sausages. 100 tampons, 100 tampons.
Okay, that sausage part at the end I think was fake. Now, this is sort of a silly example of an inefficiency that is created when you don't have women involved in the design and decision process. Here are some more. If you've ever been in an office that felt just a little bit too cold, that may be because the standard office temperature was set back in the 1960s based on the average metabolic resting rate of a man. And so today, office temperatures are on average about 5 degrees too cold for women. And I'm sure every woman in the audience has an example of this, but my personal example is when I would go and visit my mom when she worked in a male-dominated office when I was a kid. It would be summers in West Virginia, 90 degrees out, 100% humidity, and I'd walk into her office and it would be frigid cold, and all of the women in the office had their own blankets and space heaters to just warm their own areas, and it was just so wildly inefficient. If you've ever waited in a long line in the women's restroom and noticed that there was absolutely no line in the men's, this may be because when civil engineers and architects, also male-dominated fields, go to design the square footage for both men's and women's restrooms, they often allocate the same amount of space for both men's and women's restrooms. And on paper, that sounds fair, right? But let's look into it. So in the men's restroom, you have stalls and urinals, so more people can relieve themselves in the same amount of space. Women need on average twice as much time in the restroom than men. Women make up a higher percentage of the elderly and disabled who need a little bit more time in the restroom, and children are more likely to accompany women to the restroom than men. Also something that needs to change, but that's a separate conversation. And so, is it really fair that we allocate the same amount of space to men and women's restrooms. What would bathrooms look like if more women were in the room when they were designed? Now, these examples of not including women in design are a little bit annoying and inefficient, but not including women at various stages in the design process can also be dangerous. Personal protective equipment for police officers is designed based on the average male body. There was a case in the UK where a woman just could not stand wearing her personal protective vest all day, every day, that was literally protecting her life for 10 hours a day, that she got breast reduction surgery just so her vest would fit better. After her story came to light, 700 other women in that same police force stepped forward saying their vests didn't fit them well either. It's an inefficiency that is costing the safety of police officers. And then there's cars. So historically, the design of cars and the testing of cars is based solely on test dummies that are designed based on the average male body. Because of this, women, when we are in an accident, are 47% more likely to be seriously injured and 71% more likely to be moderately injured in the same accident than if it were a guy. Those numbers are really scary. 47% more likely to be seriously injured. It wasn't until 2011, which is not that long ago, that the US even required new cars to be tested with female test dummies. And even then, they're just scaled down versions of male test dummies, just smaller versions. Unfortunately, it's not that easy because women have different muscle mass distribution, we have lower bone density, different vertebrae spacing, and all of this affects the way that we are injured when we are in a car crash. And so this inefficiency is something that I think about every time I get into a car, and so now I'm forcing you to think about it too. Lack of female representation can also be found in the medical industry. A study that came out recently from UC Berkeley and the University of Chicago looked at 86 FDA-approved medications and found that women were twice as likely to get adverse drug effects than men. This is because drug dosages historically have been based on clinical trials that were conducted on men alone. Because for decades, women weren't even allowed to participate in clinical trials because, quote, female hormone fluctuations rendered them difficult to study. And we are still recovering from that lack of female representation because clinical studies take years and years and years and millions and millions and millions of dollars to do. So in all of these cases, when we assume that the average man is the average person, it leads to problems. At best, it's just annoying and inefficient, like too many tampons in space or waiting in a long line at the women's restroom. But at worst, it's deadly. It's costing our health. This isn't good for our country, it's not good for companies, and it's definitely not good for women. So, what can we do? Well, this is a very nuanced issue that requires lots of things that need to be done, but here are a few that may be within our control. Representation of women in STEM, whether it be in books and media and TV shows, is really incredibly important. Also, representation within our own organizations can be very important. So, over the last 5 to 6 years, I've been pitching science shows where I would be the host of the science show to major science networks. And I would get some unfortunate feedback that they would say, you know, predominantly our audience is male, and we just don't know if they would relate well to a solo female host. And in one meeting in particular that was very frustrating, they asked, Do you have a boyfriend or something that could co-host the show with you, maybe? And so, I want you to look at this commercial for a major science network where they're showcasing all of the science shows that they've picked up recently just to kind of advertise everything that's in their network and see if you notice any trends.
All the good love. Ooga chaka, ooga, ooga. Keep it up, world. Yeah, you turn me on. Hooked on a feeling. I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. I said I'm hooked on a feeling.
Every single host in that was a guy, except for the one half-naked woman running through the forest. And at the end, the tagline, "The world is ours." It's too on the nose, guys. It's too on the nose. The lack of self-awareness in the marketing room that day. So, based on all of that, you can imagine my surprise and delight when I got a call from Netflix that said, not only do they want my TV show, but they are totally fine with me filming it 9 months pregnant. And so now there is a wildly pregnant lady hosting a science show in 190 countries and 38 different languages on the largest streaming platform in the world. And I don't know if I really anticipated the impact that would have. The representation that brought to kids was really new. And so kids across the United States, there were little girls that dressed up as me for Halloween because they wanted to be a scientist. There were a few girls that even added a pillow to their stomach because that's what a scientist looked like. But when these things happen, it's not just for the benefit of little girls. It changes the way little boys see their peers, how little boys see girls and women as well. And so one follower sent me this homework assignment from their son, Gavin. When he was asked to draw a scientist, he drew me. He drew pregnant me from Emily's Wonder Lab. And this is all about representation in media, but representation within our own organizations is just as important. Because a lot of times I'll have companies come to me and say, well, we want to recruit women into our tech company. We want to recruit racially diverse people into our company, but they're just not applying. So what do we do? And I say, well, look at your leadership. Look at your upper management. Is that diverse? Does your company look welcoming for those people to even apply? I spoke to a woman yesterday who said something very wise. She said, you want to go to where you're celebrated, not to where you're tolerated. And the only way that you can do that, the only way that you can change the culture within your own organization to make it feel welcoming, to make it feel like a place where those people will feel celebrated, is by making sure that your leadership is gender and racially diverse, right? Give those people the decision-making authority to change the culture within your organization. But in addition to representation, when it comes to STEM, we can also do a better job of marketing STEM careers to kids. Because so often kids have this idea of a scientist as this isolated genius working by themselves on the next hot Silicon Valley technology that's going to get them rich, right? And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but girls at a higher rate than boys want to work with other people. And girls, also at a higher rate than boys, want to work in a career that's more altruistic, that will help others. And so we got to keep this in mind when we talk about STEM careers. And when it comes to science and space, I like to highlight the way that space technology is benefiting life here on Earth. And one of the big things that's changed in the space industry lately is the type of data that we can get from satellites and the frequency at which we can get that data. And one of the really cool satellites that launched in the last 5 years is NASA's SMAP satellite that measures soil moisture. It can tell us the level of water in the top 2 inches of topsoil everywhere on Earth and tell us which parts of the soil are frozen. This can help farmers down here on Earth optimize their farming. Irrigation, over-irrigation is a common efficiency problem when it comes to farming. If you can spot exactly what areas of your farmland need water, you can irrigate more precisely. You can minimize your inputs while maximizing your outputs. And with climate change, this entire environment is getting much harder to work in. So farmers need really smart tools like this to be able to optimize their farming. Now, we talked about how lack of women in STEM can lead to problems down the line and some ways that we can help fix that. But before the change can happen, we first need education. We first, more importantly, need communication. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about my philosophy for science communication that I try my best to employ across all of my social media platforms that you see up there. And that is empathetic science communication. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, I mean that I recognize that humans are not computers. We are not logical, analytical beings. Instead, we are prideful, we are emotional. There are many things that influence what we choose to believe as facts and as evidence. And I watched a really intellectual movie that illustrated this point quite nicely.
There's the train.
We made it! We're finally gonna get home! Oh no, these facts and opinions look so similar.
Don't worry about it. Happens all the time.
That was from Pixar's Inside Out, which I watched with my 2-year-old recently and thought, ooh, that is exactly the point that I'm trying to make in my presentation. So what we perceive to be true, what we perceive to be facts and evidence is influenced by our worldview. And you can think of your worldview as this makeshift house that's held up by different pillars. Things like your family values, your religious views, your culture, your upbringing, basically your identity. And here's the big thing. When a new idea enters and tries to come in your house and it threatens to renovate it in any way, change one of those pillars, for example, your brain acts like a bodyguard, preventing it from coming in. This is known as the backfire effect. The backfire effect is a psychological phenomenon, which means that when your deepest convictions are challenged with contradictory evidence, then you often leave that situation even more sure than you were before about your original beliefs. And to put an example on that, if you believe that the earth is flat, for example, and I show you an image of a globe that NASA provided from a satellite that shows that the earth is in fact round, you might leave that conversation convinced that that was CGI and even more sure than you were before that the earth is flat. My attempt to persuade you with facts and evidence backfired. Now, the backfire effect is a very depressing psychological phenomenon for educators, for science communicators, and for humanity in general. But there are some things that we can do to present facts and evidence in a more welcoming way to unwelcoming houses. And the first thing that we can do is simply to be kind. That sounds a little too simplistic, but I promise you there is science behind this. In our brains, we have something called the prefrontal cortex. This is the front part of our brain that deals with processing information and decision making. We also have the amygdala, which is a smaller part of our brain that deals with raw human emotion, like fight or flight, eating, and mating, things like that. And in low-stress situations, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala can work together really well as a team to react to information and make a rational decision. But in high-stress situations, if someone feels threatened or attacked, then the amygdala has the power to completely override the prefrontal cortex. Meaning, if you're in a conversation and you attack somebody, you put them on the defensive, you can scientifically remove their ability to think critically about that conversation that you're having. And so, being nice can go a long way towards building that trust so communication can happen. But it takes more than just being nice. We have to be empathetic. And to show you what I mean by this, I want to give you a case study of my own home state. Because a fun fact that is in fact not that fun about West Virginia is that it is number one in the entire country when it comes to the fewest percentage of people that believe that global warming is happening. And if you're from outside the state, you might conjure these stereotypes of hillbilly Appalachian West Virginians and conclude that they don't believe in the science because they are stupid. But I want to shed a little nuance on the issue so that we can all develop a little empathy for the situation. Because if you grew up in West Virginia, you know a lot about coal, right? Coal is part of your identity. And if you grew up in West Virginia, the story of coal that you've been told is inherently different than the story you'll hear elsewhere. The story of coal that you've been told, if you grew up in West Virginia, is one of a love story. One where we were given this God-given gift of coal, something that keeps the lights on for West Virginians, something that keeps the lights on for America. And chances are, if you're from West Virginia, you got all of your information from this organization, which is called Friends of Coal. It's an advocacy group founded by the coal industry. And their mission statement states, Friends of Coal is dedicated to inform and educate West Virginia citizens about the coal industry and its vital role, here's the important part, in the state's future. In the state's future, right? And they do this in two strategic ways. The first way is they recruit West Virginia cultural icons to be spokesmen, to be friends of coal for them at sporting events, public speaking events, and commercials. And so this includes NASCAR drivers, professional bass fishermen, and head coaches of the very popular West Virginia football teams, right? Like the Mountaineers and Marshall Herd. And when you're from a state like West Virginia, that doesn't often end up on good lists, like highest rate of opioid overdoses, lowest rate of median income, highest rate of people on food stamps, highest rate of childhood obesity. You get it when you live in a state where things aren't going so great, but the football team is good. You hail the success of that football team and you idolize the people who make it so. And so when the head football coaches are friends of coal, that means something. And while this strategy is a little bit concerning, it's the second strategy that they employ that's the most troubling, and that's the work they do in schools. And so you may have heard West Virginia make national headlines because we were one of the first states where we had a statewide strike with our teachers because our teachers are notoriously some of the lowest paid teachers in the country with the worst benefits. So they had a statewide strike. Well, the coal industry is taking advantage of this situation, and they're offering teachers tens of thousands of dollars worth of grants to teach coal lessons designed by the coal industry. And so you can sort of imagine how unbiased these lessons are. And so when I go back to West Virginia and I talk about climate change, I remember these kids, because these kids are taught, if you're not a friend of coal, then do you hate West Virginia? Do you hate yourself? And they get this message from West Virginia celebrities, from their teachers, and from their own parents, because after all, they received the same message when they were kids. And now this doesn't mean that we can't criticize this point of view, but we've got to do it in the right way, because if we paint these communities with a broad stroke and conclude that they don't believe in climate change because they are stupid, then we will miss the point, right? Because for many people in West Virginia, this isn't a scientific issue, it's an economic one. My dad worked for a coal company and lost his job growing up, but he was one of the lucky ones who was able to find another job to support his family. Many other West Virginians aren't so lucky, and that creates these other problems that you hear about, of highest rate of people on food stamps, they can't afford healthy food, highest rate of childhood obesity, lowest rate of median income, highest rate of opioid overdoses. All of these stem from an economic issue, not a scientific, educational one. And so when I talk about climate change in West Virginia, I frame it from the economic lens. I talk about how other industries, like perhaps solar power, can be brought to West Virginia to replace some of the hundreds of jobs that have been lost by the dying coal industry. We have a ton of land in West Virginia that's been degraded from coal mining that can't be used for anything else. It would cost too much to repair, to build infrastructure on, but it can be used for solar farms, right? And so when I talk about climate change in West Virginia, I'm just a little bit more strategic and a lot more empathetic. Another strategy that you can use to bring science and facts to perhaps unwelcoming houses is to bait the hook to suit the fish. This is an adage mostly used in marketing circles, but I think science communicators and educators could benefit from it as well. It means to focus on the interest of your audience. Talk about what they care about, not what you think they should care about. And the way that you figure out what people care about is to categorize them in some way. And there are many ways to categorize people, but some of the more popular ways is political. So researchers of political psychology have found that liberals tend to value things like fairness, equality, protection from harm, and empathy, whereas conservatives tend to more highly value things like loyalty, purity, respect for authority, and patriotism. So if you're talking to someone who leans conservative about environmental issues, don't talk about saving the polar bears, right? I think this is a mistake that we make way too often. Instead, frame your argument about environmental policies as a way to keep our land, water, and air pure. Show people pictures of how dirty and disgusting the USA was before we had environmental regulations that we have today put in place. Research out of Stanford from Professor Rob Willer has showed that conservatives are more likely to support environmental regulations when they are framed to their values in this way. Ultimately, however, with any interaction we have to ask ourselves the question, what is our goal with this interaction? Is it to be right, or is it to change somebody's mind? Because if all we want to be is right, that's easy. You can be snarky, you can be condescending, you can even be mean, and you may be right. But that's all you'll be. If you want to change somebody's mind, if you want to be persuasive, that takes more effort. You're going to have to be a little bit more strategic and a lot more empathetic. Thank you all so much for having me, and I look forward to meeting you all after this. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Emily Calandrelli. She has agreed to stay around for some questions, and I believe we have roving microphones out in our audience. Do we have any takers who would like to try a question on Emily Calandrelli? We have a taker to the southeast end of things, I believe.
Two things. One, can I get a selfie after the
Yes,
event?
you can.
Awesome. Two, my sister really loves your show, and she was wondering if you had any tips on like school, like I guess funding for like college or whatever.
Ooh, how old's your sister? Is she in high school?
She's 9 right now. She's just
She's
thinking really
9,
far ahead.
And she's worried about paying for college. Oh, goodness gracious. I went to a state school for undergrad, and I came out with absolutely no debt. So if I were to give specific advice, it would probably only reflect my own situation, because in West Virginia, they had really great programs to help keep students in the state, and so I had a decent GPA in high school and was able to get scholarships to pay for my undergrad because I stayed in my in-state school. And then here's the kicker: when you major in STEM and you're going to grad school in science, I don't know anybody who went to grad school to study any of the sciences, medical school aside, that's a whole different beast, but getting a graduate degree like a master's in science that had to pay for it. There is so much money out there from the government and from different universities that will pay you because you're doing research at that university. So my recommendation would be to look for scholarships to go to your in-state universities and then major in STEM and get someone else to pay for it for grad school.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Good advice, thank you. Another question for Emily? We have a taker up front. She can hear you. I don't know if the audience will.
Yeah, I'll repeat it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like how can we inspire the confidence in women and girls to pursue these degrees in STEM that are often male-dominated? Is that more or less the question? And, well, I don't know much about AI, to be quite honest, but in STEM fields in general, I think my advice for little girls, because it's so intimidating as a girl, and for people of color know this even more intimately, when you walk into a room and nobody looks like you, it automatically feels unwelcoming. And as a student, like a freshman, you know that you're choosing one of the hard majors, which you have to have courage to do already. And so these things can pile up and maybe encourage you to leave that room and try something different. So one of the things that I tell younger girls is to try to find people who are like you in these women in STEM groups. So Girls Who Code, Black Girls Code is another really great organization, through Girl Scouts, through First Robotics or Vex Robotics. There's a lot of these organizations where you can find people who have similar interests, specifically other girls, hopefully, that have your interests, that you can go to sort of lean on when you feel like an other, because those are the people that are gonna help you stay. So getting involved in those groups as early as possible is really important, in my opinion.
Thank you, Emily. We have time for one more.
Thank you. My name is Carrie Krepke, and I will be teaching social media communications class next semester. I was wondering, who runs your social media accounts for you, and how do you decide what platform to use?
I do it all myself, and it drives me crazy. It is a lot, because I'll get DMs from people that are like, I don't know who's running this account, but I just wanted to say, I'm like, it's me. I'm doing it. And so I answer all of my messages myself, which is probably not smart. At some point, I should hire somebody. But for me, I find that I like to focus my efforts on a platform that I enjoy. Because at some point, when you're going to be pouring hours and hours and hours into this work, because social media, when you treat it like a job, will sometimes feel like work, you want to enjoy it. And there are some platforms like Twitter that I hate, and so I try to avoid it like the plague. But TikTok is one that I love. I enjoy being on it, I enjoy making videos on it, and so that's the one that I focus on the most. And it's probably no coincidence that that's also the one that I have the most followers on. And so I treat that one as home base, and then I repost the content on other platforms, and that works for me. Other people have a different home base. Other people use Twitter as their home base and share their tweets across other platforms. Some people use YouTube as their home base and share clips of those videos on other platforms. It's just what you personally enjoy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Alas, we are out of time, but I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone when I say you are welcome back in Iowa anytime. Emily Calandrelli, everybody.
Thank you.
Delightful and insightful. You are great. Well, with that, it's time to bring today's conversation to the finish line, or maybe it's the starting line. In either case, we have 5 thinkers across the spectrum to wrap it up for us and give us all marching orders. They represent the following sectors: economic development, represented by Director Debbie Durham of Iowa Economic Development Authority. We have the workforce development perspective, represented by Director Beth Townsend of Iowa Workforce Development. We have the K-12 perspective, represented by Paul Gaussman, Superintendent of the Sioux City Schools. We have the community college perspective, represented by Steve Schultz, President of North Iowa Area Community College. And we have the 4-year and university perspective, represented by Mark Putnam, President of Central College. So no pressure, folks, but you're speaking for wide swaths of humanity. This is all being moderated by Beth Townsend. Thank you very much. So I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with some of my favorite workforce partners about the future of transforming education for workforce. I did want to start by answering a question that Emily was asked about how to pay for college for the 9-year-old. In Iowa, we do that. It's called the Last Dollar Scholarship, and it will pay for up to a 2-year degree in a high-demand occupation, most of which are STEM, and you can use that to have a career in IT, healthcare, all kinds of other industries and occupations. So we've been future ready, getting future ready for a while now, and that's a great opportunity to get our young people into college and out of college debt-free. So just wanted to pass that along. Okay, so we're going to talk about, from each one of their perspectives, first of all, we're going to start talking about how do you think the pandemic impacted your institution's approach to education in terms of preparing for the future workforce? Steve?
Well, I think it impacted every piece of what we do. And, really it allowed us to move forward with technology and deliver an education where people are faster than we ever would have without the pandemic to kind of push us forward. It also allowed access to some folks that just wouldn't have, quite frankly, been on one of our campuses at any of these places. So it's really been about change. It's been about trying to be flexible and about trying to meet people, employers, and workforce where they are.
Great. And Debbie, how would you say, or the pandemic has impacted workforce and business, or business and employers?
Well, first of all, it is so good to know why it is so damn cold in here, right?
Amen, Emily.
My teeth have been shattering this whole day. So let me start with that. I finally know the answer. And I have challenged the gentleman on that to be sensitive to that going forward. So, well, first of all, let me just say the pandemic really became a disruptor to the equilibrium of our workforce. And like, quite frankly, Beth, we're still sorting all that out. But let me just tell you some things that are startling to me. You know, first of all, the pandemic was not good for women. And, you know, we were finally to the point where we're making such great strides at actually closing that pay gap for women. And then we see that, you know, so many of them just completely checked out. And I think a lot of that had to do with education, quite frankly, that they were at home with the online school learning, you know, childcare needs, aging parents on one end. But the other groups that were interesting, it was also very disruptive to millennials. And what we saw with millennials is that there was no work-life balance as a whole because people were working at home and you don't turn it off at all. Many of them were in a financial position that they've just checked out. I don't know what that means. I don't know if they're coming back or if they're going to come back recreated, doing something different. Gen Zs had, you know, they were 3 times higher to be unemployed during pandemic. And then what we're seeing is people are jumping careers, right? We're seeing in the financial world that they're getting healthcare workers, right, that really got burnt out. Or when you see the service industry, which was some of the hardest hitting, you know, it's actually is a new play for manufacturing. So again, it disrupted the entire equilibrium, and I don't know, a year from now we may have a better idea of, you know, what's permanent and what's temporary, but it's certainly been interesting to follow.
Paul, certainly K-12 has probably been one of the more impacted areas. So what have you seen?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here and to talk about this. I think it's a little warm in here, so we may want to cool it down a little. It was interesting to watch all of us say, you know, are you working from home? You're working from home. And later on, I started to hear people saying, no, I live at work. Because that's really what's happened to all of us, is that you never get to put work aside, and it becomes very different that way. It impacted us in a lot of ways. Sioux City's 15,000 students, 70% poverty, 60 home countries. We're really a global district with almost 50 home languages spoken, and that really widened the gap. I don't even care what gap you're talking about, it widened the gap. And in our career programs, we're very proud of our career programs with 40 pathways and 17 participating high schools. Thanks to the governor, we've got actually high schools coming in from Nebraska and South Dakota to participate in our programming. The governors of the 3 states allowed us to make that happen. But they're such high touch, project-based. The pandemic really slowed those down. Our leader, our principal of the Career Academy is in the room somewhere, Katie Towler. She's fantastic. And really what we've had to do is we built this program over 4 or 5 years, and now we've got to kind of start it up again and get moving. So it's really important. Having said that, we communicate with one another better than we ever have. Because we've got the opportunity. The urban superintendents in Iowa are meeting regularly, where before we used to think you had to drive to Des Moines to talk to one another or whatever. And so certainly there are good things that have come out of that. Every child has a device and connectivity in Sioux City. I would have told you 3 years ago that was impossible. Apparently, not impossible. So we really do have to weigh the positives and the negatives, but look at the ways in which we in the educational system are not known for being nimble, and we're not known for, you know, absence of bureaucracy, right? We're a big bureaucratic organization, but we've been forced to reinvent ourselves. And if we can keep that going, I think we're going to be better 5 years from now than we are today in a long measure.
And Mark, what have you seen from a 4-year perspective?
Well, flexibility is the key to air power, right?
Amen, brother, amen.
We've known that for a long time. But I think it cut both ways on our 4-year college and university campuses. There was a spread of technological knowledge and ability that was unprecedented because we had to rally in a very short period of time in order to be able to teach remotely. But we also learned the limits of that, in that education is still fundamentally a human enterprise. All the aids of technology can enhance that significantly. But we found students across the spectrum of public and private universities and colleges really with one refrain: please don't make me sit at the dining room table anymore, right? Because they want to be campus-based, right? So if I was opting in as a student to a fully online program that, you know, was just that, then I've opted in for that. but students who are going to these campus-based institutions have done so because they want the fullness of the experience. And so I think the second phase, as we came through last year after we got away from the dining room table, was the challenge of the intensity of the protocols. And because we seek to be interactive in those contexts, the dehumanizing theme was the big one that came forward, especially for first-year students. You know, people would walk around and say, "It's nice to see your eyes." You know, and so I was talking to a sophomore this year who was commenting on the fact that just I'm meeting people that I already knew for the first time. And so I think that it cut in those two directions, that we learned a lot pedagogically, we learned a lot about the tools, we learned about the ways to adapt, and there will be residual benefits from that. But the other side of it was a reminder that we're working with people.
Yeah, very good. So Steve, how would you say that those impacts, how have that resulted in change within your institution in terms of how you educate and train students?
Well, one of the first things that we did is we found some great success in hybrid models. Most of the community colleges had face-to-face interaction and divided groups. You know, if you had a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, you came one day a week. And we found a real desire from our students when we surveyed them to continue to offer those kind of opportunities. So one of the things I know we did at NIAC, and I know my peers are doing the same thing, is we created this entire hybrid schedule so that it'll be more flexible for people. They can stay in the workforce. They can come when it works. They can be home when their kids are sick or on quarantine. It really worked. That's one of the most important things that I think we learned from that, is that we just need to be continuing to look for ways to be, we heard flexible over here. And I can't help but think back to some of the comments Emily made. I was thinking about her description of science and the historical norms that are there. You know, we're the same way. We've got all these walls that we've built up. And to be truthful, the future is graying the lines between K-12, between community colleges, 4 years, and the workforce. And at the end of the day, and I guess that backfire effect hit me pretty hard there, because we're constantly trying to, legislatively, we go down and try to fight for our own programs, right? We don't do that collectively. We kind of do that competitively, right? And so, who's going to solve the workforce problem? All of us. It can't be one of us. We've all tried that on our own. And so I think that's what I've taken away from this, is it's really all hands on deck. And even if we do it well, we still don't have enough people, right? But we have to get high school students engaged in post-secondary education. That's one thing that we've learned too. We still have about 38% of our high school graduates not doing anything after high school. We have 66% of our students going to a 4-year college, and only 20 to 30% of the jobs of the future require it. There's a ton of change that needs to take place, and those are the kind of things that we're talking about and focusing on in the 2-year space, at least, is how do we be that conduit in the middle of all of this, allowing people to get in and out of programs, work, go to school, be a parent, raise kids, all of those things, and we just have to get better at that. And so those are the kinds of things that the colleges are working on, I think, is really trying to create those kind of statewide programs so they're not just in a pocket in Sioux City or Pella, that it's a systematic approach to helping people get educated, get the skills they need, and get into the workforce, and most importantly, stay in Iowa.
I totally love what you said, and I hope somebody recorded it, because I plan to play it for the legislature when we reconvene in January, because he's totally correct. It has to be a systemic approach. We can do so much more together than we can separately, and we are doing more together, and I think hopefully Iowans are getting the benefit of that. So Debbie, what have you seen in terms of impacts of the changes that we've seen in the course of the pandemic on business and industry?
Well, certainly, industry and businesses have become more creative in recruiting, right, and in training, and all the reasons you said, because work looks different. But and I know we're here to talk about skill sets and raising the skill sets, but at the end of the day, we have a population problem still in Iowa too, right? And so the only way to solve this, because we have, like the governor talked about, an incredibly dynamic economy. I was in Fort Madison, visited 3 manufacturers that morning, 3. Between them, they have 400 job openings, and that's without expansions. Every one of them was starting at 18 plus an hour plus full benefits, and most of them were in that $22, $25. So these are good jobs. So the answer is we have to supplement with technology. So we launched the Manufacturing 4.0 initiative, which we're working very closely with our community colleges on that. But we have to overlay this Industry 4.0 across all sectors. It's vital to deal with this, which also requires a very different skill sets when you think about from the education point of view. Like I see we have our home builder friends that are here today. We're talking about 3D printing homes, that you can print a home in 3 days, right? And you still need contractors to put it together, but looks differently, or robotic bricklaying. And so the jobs are not going to be as plentiful, because they can't be, because we don't have the people. But what you are going to see is actually an increase in job needs. Those jobs are going to look just very, very differently. And you pick any industry, and that's the path that we have to go down.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, I guess I first want to say that today has just been a blessing. And I mean the part before we came up here. It was an absolute blessing. So many times I've been superintendent in Sioux City for 14 years. When I moved here, it took 3 hours to get from Sioux City to Des Moines. Now I do it in about 2 hours and 10 minutes, but it's just the way it's worked. But I got to a point before the pandemic where I'd say to my wife, I got to go to Des Moines again next week, and you think of that. I was absolutely giddy. Who has ever said this? I was absolutely giddy to come to Des Moines and spend time with colleagues. And I think if we all were able to go back to our, whatever our circle is, and share with 5, 6, 7 people, I'm always in search of pithy or really, really, when you come to an event like this, if I just get one nugget, and I think today I've got like a dozen nuggets. That's the theme for next year. Dozen nuggets of fun. And so I really have. I've made so many notes today, and I don't know if that's because we're just kind of getting back together after so much time apart. But communication is everything for our success. We have to communicate what we've been doing here. We have to communicate why it works. We have to learn how to communicate with one another. I'm talking about business in K-12 just because that's my lens I'm here to look through. The businesses know what they need, and they think they know what we need, and we know what we need and think that we know what they need, and we've got to find ways that we can communicate better. We've got to do this far more often because doors are just opening in my mind today because of some of the things I've heard from some, not even necessarily in K-12. And if we can find ways to keep that communication going, it's really important that I loved Jane's comment in that video that Jeff referred to about 12th graders, and our plan is just that students graduate with a diploma and a plan for their future that will change. Everybody's plan changes, but at least you have one. And it doesn't have to include this or that. It doesn't have to include 4-year or 2-year, but it does have to include some sort of learning afterward, and that's got to be in partnership with business and industry. We've got to get better at serving them so that we can serve one another. One last thing, our personnel shortage in K-12, and I know elsewhere, is really going to be a challenge for us moving forward. We've got to get people in serving kids so that kids can serve the society going forward. Thank you.
Very good. Mark?
So I tell students, really, there is only one major today, and that's adaptation. And it spawns conversation because they have lots of different pursuits, but what we keep saying to students now is whatever unfolds is going to require you to adapt. So how many possible futures can you create? How many possible pathways and opportunities and lanes? And so when I think about how do we adapt to that same world that we're working through, I use this term often, loose ball, jump ball. And it is the notion that our organizations and our systems, just where we represent the same thing, we always organize vertically, right? If you threw out the parts of an organization on the floor, it would always organize itself organically in a vertical format, and that's why we use terms like standing up an organization, right? Because that's the way we think. What we all do as leaders is we fight for the horizontal, right? Because if we fall prey to always being in the vertical, then we're going to lose the possibility for adaptation, for creativity, for innovation. So when I think about loose ball, jump ball is a problem of horizontal. A loose ball is, it's running all over the place and everyone's trying to grab it and doesn't know what to do with it. A jump ball is two people are fighting over the ball and then we got to sort it out, right? And that's the challenge of not being vertical. But the patience it takes to work through loose ball, jump ball is to say, we got to talk. That's the communication theme coming back, right? That when we sit together and work on something specifically, and we have to be adaptive and creative and innovative and break rules and break silos, which is hard to do because the organization will always push us vertically as we push horizontally, then I think that's what I have learned the most through the pandemic, is that I have had to break every vertical rule to get a college through a pandemic, and the only answers are horizontal.
You know, Mark, that was actually very profound.
That was a pithy nugget.
Well done, Mark. Okay, so the last thing I want to ask you guys about is how are we going to transform education to meet our future workforce needs?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So I'm not as funny as Paul, so I'm going to go first. I think as we really look at the work that we're doing, some of the items that we're thinking about across the state is really how do we reach down into the K-12s and help with career decision-making, counseling. We've got some pilots this year in the state where we're placing college and career counselors in high schools. And counselors in the room, bless you, we know you don't have time for this. So how can we help? How can we put people in high schools to help them with that transition, whether they come to NIAC or whether they go to Central? Let's help them identify the opportunities, such as Emily talked about, and get them started down that pathway, right? I think that's a system change that we can do. Then those counselors actually work at the college and support them all the way through, keeping that empathetic piece in place, caring for them and nurturing them. It's a really neat model that we've written an earmark for, and we're doing some piloting across the state. I think on the other end, it's really opening the conversation between our employers and all of us. We've all had our own little boxes. There was a time when there was a line longer than I needed to fill the jobs. That's gone. So, we hear employers now say, well, you just give us bodies, we'll train them ourselves. Okay, well, that's great, but that's not what you were made for. Some of us were made to do that. So how can we work together to really get that done? And that's really where I think the butter's going to be spread, is in that space of breaking down those walls and really taking a look at the resources and the talents that we have to bring to the table. We're a talented group of folks in this room. We just need to put our heads together and do our best to get students prepared and citizens prepared to serve this economy and themselves, right? Raise them up. That's our job.
Debbie?
Well, I really like this vertical horizontal play because, if you see me present anything about our economy, we have these 3 mature traded clusters that are really vertically, right, integrated. But I always show ed tech, quite frankly, and innovation is the horizontal bar that runs through those. That's the disruptors, if you think about. So ed tech, and the thing that's frustrating for me, we have this growing ed tech economy here in Iowa that's all around Industry 4.0 overlays for education, but yet we can't ever get into the education world to actually, to test some of these, right? And so that's a frustration that we have to work on. But it is all about creativity, and to pick up on the first panel today, or the employers, when Carrie said it's about problem solving, it's about agility, it's about collaboration, and the part that I thought was so startling was comfortable navigating with limited knowledge. And if that, to me, defined all of 2020, right? But honestly, I think it's the world in which we live on going forward. And, teaching that comfort level to students that they're not going to always, or anyone, our employees, when we empower our employees, you're not going to always know what you're going to have to navigate very, very difficult times in that horizontal bar. So yeah, Mark, thanks for that. Paul.
Yeah, to me, as we look forward, we've never been in a better position than we are right now to make ourselves better over the next, half dozen years. How many times have we sat around a table and said, if we just had some money, if we just had $1 million, what could we do for kids? And, through the American Relief or the ESSERS funding in the K-12, and I know there's other levels of funding elsewhere, if we're not better in 5 years, I screwed up. Because they dole it out on the Title I formula for some part, and so districts with higher poverty may get by percentage a fair amount more. But poverty is one of the greatest civil rights issues of our time. I know America's got a lot of challenges. I know there are a lot of civil rights issues we have to handle. If we can come out of this equalizing the challenges of poverty, which, by the way, crosses racial groups, ethnic groups, and give the poor kids what the kids with wealth have in terms of support and mentoring and love and opportunities for growth, we're going to be better in the long run. And we will never again have an opportunity like we do sitting here today, coming out of a pandemic, hopefully, right? And having some supports there that are over and above that which we've been through. The lack of workforce is really scary, and in K-12 we're going to have to grow our own moving forward. We always have those challenges where we'll have some accreditation agency come in and tell us that we don't have enough staff members that look like our kids. And usually that accreditation agency is a bunch of white people sitting around a table, and it's kind of the way that it is. But if we're a global district, we've got to grow our global workforce moving forward, and these career programs are going to help us do that. But now is that time. This is a once in a career, once in a lifetime opportunity, and I think we should embrace it as such, even though it's kind of been a pain in the butt.
Okay, Mark, lay some more wisdom on us.
Okay, here it comes. So, diagonal, right? Yes, we are orthogonal. Actually, is the new direction. In Pella, we had a Future Ready Iowa event a few years ago. Remember, there were regional events moving around for periods before the pandemic, and we happened to host it regionally on our campus at Central. And a lot of us who were from Pella were really inspired by that. And we began to get together and have a conversation about what we could do. And we posed this really bizarre question. What if the only workforce we had to grow locally? That was it. There's no other source you could get. How creative, how energetic would we get? So we got a whole bunch of people around a table, and we came up with a name that actually doesn't really exist anymore, but we called it the Pella Talent Pipeline. So this is going to be our initiative. All the business leaders, the major corporations in Pella, our school system people, the college, DMAC, the whole hee-haw gang, as I called it, got together, and we said, what would we do if the only thing we could do? And so that led through time to something that has taken several years, lots of work, state support, to be sure, which is called the Work Smart Connector. And that program was born of a Future Ready Iowa event, was nurtured and fed and grown through a combination of the Pella Area Community and Economic Alliance, all our major corporations, the school systems, DMAC and Central. And the result of that has been really creative thinking and a lot of new articulation agreements and ways in which we work together programmatically. As good as the programs are, the more profound impact has been the relationships. That we now know our partners really well. And that's true for many of our communities. Small communities, we tend to know each other. But it's not just about knowing a person, it's I understand their world and their work and what they're trying to achieve, whatever role we play. So I think that's the next level we have to get to. It's not enough to have a sort of no skin in the game, no personal interests at stake, kind of vapid conversation about organizations that goes on for 2 hours, there's always lunch, and then it kind of goes away. What I think we need is actually to sit down and say, how committed are we to each other? Am I really invested in your success? And what do I have to give up? What do I have to, so in the case of the Work Smart Connector, we had no categories. We know how to do this. And so we've got huge, Lowell Ernst, to Siri spoke earlier. Terry Voss is director of Work Smart Connector. Many of you know these folks. And what we ended up having to do was to say, we have some money coming in through corporate grants and state grant money that's coming our way. All right, well, Central will serve as the fiscal agent. It's actually not about our programs, because it's really about apprenticeships and certificate programs and other work-based learning opportunities. And then we house Terry at this point to help run that program. And this will evolve through time. And the Pella Talent Pipeline Board, passed this off to another organization so it could grow and develop. So it wasn't about I own something, it was I steward something, right? It wasn't about my interest, it was our interest. And that happened because people cared about people.
Great, great conversation. I hope you all appreciated that as much as I did. I think one of the things that's going to come out of the pandemic that warms my heart and gives us hope and inspiration at workforce development is education is transforming, and it's transforming in the recognition that we don't have the luxury, nor should we as a society want to leave anybody behind. And we're recognizing that there aren't cookie cutter approaches to education that are going to work and fit for every person. So we are looking at how do we meet you where you are? And how do we communicate to you that you are a person of value? Even if you've had some barriers in your past. I don't care if you're a returning citizen, if you have a disability, if you've just had a tough time in life. We still value you, we see that value, we want to give you hope, and we want to provide you with an educational system that's going to give you the training you need to have a very successful, happy, healthy, and productive life. And I think that's what I have seen overall in terms of how we are transforming in the state of Iowa our approach to education. It's great to improve our systems, but it's that fundamental recognition of the value of our students and our citizens that is going to drive the success that we need to create all the opportunity and economic abundance that we hope to create in the state of Iowa. So I want to say thank you to my fellow panelists. Thank you all for being here today. I want to put a plug in because we are having more workforce roundtables. I would encourage you to go to futurereadyiowa.gov. We're having about 25 this fall, and we're going to talk with employers about what they need and how we can help them, how the state can help them, how can we marshal our resources to assist them, and then we're also going to talk about assessments that we're offering to employers where we'll come and talk to you about what your needs are and then design a plan specifically for you to meet those needs. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff and say thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Debbie. Oh, so much. Steve, Beth, well done. Wow, what a mental treat, eh? One more round of applause for these thinkers. So appreciative. There were at least a dozen more nuggets in that half hour. Quick housekeeping note before we wrap up today. If you're one of the 180 or so educators who signed on for the Summit Work-Based Learning License Renewal Credit course, that group meets at 2:15 in 306. I'm 99% sure on that room number, 306. The governor, of course, would have liked to have been here to make wrap-up remarks, but of course we know she got diverted through her unforgiving schedule elsewhere this afternoon. But we are very grateful that she has a stand-in, a most worthy stand-in. You met earlier today her co-chair of the Governor's STEM Advisory Council, Diane Young. Once again, I'll remind you, owner, founder, technical director for the company in Cherokee, Iowa called Foundation Analytical Laboratory. And Diane has volunteered to sum it all up for us. Diane? Good luck.
Jeff was definitely correct when he said good luck with that. So I'm going to give you just a little snapshot of all of my notes, and that's just part of them. So I might have to look all the way around to read them all. So I will just try to keep it short. So, wow. I think you can all agree, what an amazing, amazing day, right? It's a great day for education and workforce transformation and workplace preparation. Like me, I'm sure you're all feeling very challenged, motivated, and jazzed to drive work readiness in Iowa. I know I am. We've heard from students, educators, employers who shared firsthand their perspective on what is still needed to prepare our students for the high demand careers that we have in our state. And I learned a new word today, or a phrase, having students that are global competence. I think that's pretty awesome. As an employer, I face that need in Cherokee, Iowa. Foundation Analytical Laboratory, we began with 2 employees and an intern in 2009. The lab now employs 29 skilled Iowans that we are keeping at home. We continue to grow, and it is crucial that today's youth have the opportunity to collaborate and learn from local workplaces in order to ensure that they are adequately prepared and informed about the opportunities that are in our state. Authentic learning experiences are key to driving home the importance and application of skills and lessons that are being taught in our classrooms. It makes a connection to learning that simply can't be made anywhere else. This afternoon, employers and state leaders shared with us examples of what is already working from an economic, education, and workforce perspective, along with ideas for transformational action. Now, I'd like you to challenge each and every one of you to identify just one step that we can take as individuals to advance workplace learning in your communities and your sphere of influence. If all 700 of us in attendance today take that one step, what an amazing transformation we will bring. I'm going to give you a little heads up on one little thing that we're planning on doing. So we have the guys from Lewis Central, the amazing rock stars. They're doing great things with their students. I was telling them today, I said, so I'd like to place an order for 500 coasters that are in blue and green plastic that I can send to all of my customers and all of our clients across the United States and into Canada, and have a note about STEM, because I guarantee you all of my clients are STEM related. What a difference. Then maybe we can have our clients start thinking of, oh my gosh, these were junior high from Western Iowa. Look at what they're doing. This is amazing. How can we get involved? So, something for you to all think about. Thank you for joining the conversation today. I am excited to see what the future holds in our great state. I love the outside of the box thinking. We need big thinkers with big ideas. My staff hates it when I'm driving, because that's when I do a lot of thinking, and I'm like, I got an idea, guys, and they're all like, ugh. So, they usually turn out pretty good. So, I want all of you to go home to your businesses, your school systems, even in your workplace, and go, I've got a big idea, and then execute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you all for coming. Let's go get Iowa future ready. Thank you. Safe travels.